I translate AI not as artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence or alternative. The exciting thing is AI intelligence is very different from human, and that's great because we want something new. We already have seen that AI and human together is better at identifying cancer in scans than each one individually. There's a human which kicks off the process, but after that it's the data which changes the code. It reparameterizes itself, changes and things. But an AI can respond on the fly to the things that you're doing and create the music to be in tune, kind of literally with how you're playing. And the exciting thing for me is we have this prospect of an enrichment of our experience, and I think doctors will really benefit going forward from that combination. I think we're already able to do this. I had a woman from MIT Media Labs who came and gave a talk in Oxford. Really interesting. She was analyzing whether an AI could detect a false smile in a human. So sometimes you're talking to somebody, they're smiling away, but actually they're really uncomfortable. It turned out that the AI was much better at understanding when a smile was false than we humans. It was picking up the key indicators so already it's empathizing more with the person it's engaging with. And this, she realized, was going to be very useful, for example, for autistic children who find it very hard to read the mind of the other. And so if an AI was able to be sort of loaded up into augmented reality glasses, might help the autistic kid to understand the emotional state of the person they're talking to, who seem to be smiling but actually is uncomfortable. I think we need to get away from this narrative as if it's some sort of competition between AI and humans. This is actually, AI will be a fantastic tool for a journalist to kind of do the work that perhaps they don't enjoy so much. For example, you mentioned finance and business. A lot of the information is written in kind of reports with numbers and things like that. What AI is being very good at is actually putting the information that's hidden inside there, understanding the patterns and putting it into natural language such that somebody doesn't have the facilities that I have to read numbers and see the message that is inside there, is able to act as an interpreter of the digital world, the world of numbers, and actually help somebody with natural language to understand what's going on. We're already seeing, of course, articles being written by AI, and for example, in election time, very often if you're interested in your particular constituency, you don't want 600 journalists working on each constituency telling you. AI can tell quite a convincing story of what happened to this particular election this year compared to 4 years ago. The other very interesting place I've seen journalism, AI journalism used is one of the things many people do around the world is fantasy football. They choose 11 players and they create their own team, and according to how the players do that weekend, you score points. They've developed an AI which can produce a football report for your particular team. Now, there are millions of fantasy football teams, so you could never have journalists, human journalists, writing that. You wouldn't want them to. But this AI produces for each a bespoke report for every single team, which I think is very, very exciting. But I think you're right. There is a challenge of how does an AI interpret an embodied experience of a crowd or being at a concert or something like that. And so this is why you want a collaboration. My message going forward is that we need to be a bit more optimistic. It's about AI being a new tool for helping us to do things. So maybe AI will detect things about a concert that no individual could because of their position, but they'll be able to take a more global look. But combined, that's much more exciting to have both.
Marcus, did you want to share with them the Harry Potter story?
Sanjoy alluded to the fact that AI seems to have difficulty with writing in a kind of long-term way. So it's quite good at producing short-term journalistic pieces, a couple of paragraphs which make some sort of sense. But what it isn't able to do is sort of build a long-lasting narrative. So it sort of loses the plot. It can't understand what it's set up and the implications. So there was a a group of coders in America they're called Botnik. They're quite fun to look up. They're different projects, but they're big Harry Potter fans, and they were really disappointed there are only 7 volumes of Harry Potter. They wanted more, and so they got a piece of AI to take all of J.K. Rowling's previous work, learn her style of writing, the kind of themes involved, and then it started to produce an 8th volume. It was called Harry Potter and What Looks Like a Large Pile of Ash. Kind of strange title, but intriguing. And it started off quite well, if I can remember how it goes. It was magic. It was something that Harry Potter thought was very good or something. So it already understood that magic was an important theme in this. And then it goes on to describe the rain kind of lashing down on Harry as he walked towards the castle.
Leathery rain.
It calls it leathery sheets of rain. Now that, I think, is a very creative kind of way of describing rain that the AI came up with. I've never heard anyone call rain leathery. So it was already coming up with some quite interesting things. It had understood the major themes, but after that it sort of started to lose the plot quite literally, and it says Ron was standing there and doing a kind of frenzied tap dance. It's like, where does that come from? And he started eating Hermione's family, and Ron's shirt was just as bad as Ron himself. And you realize, okay, this has still got a long way to go before we get a whole volume of Harry Potter. But, things are advancing very quickly. There's a new text generation algorithm called GPT-3 created by OpenAI. And I've already done a review of a novel that was co-written between this piece of AI and a human, and they basically bounce stories to and fro from each other. And the AI is making just such strange suggestions that it's pushing the human into new areas and ideas that they wouldn't have gone to without the stimulation from the AI. And for me, that's the really exciting thing. It's kind of kicking us out of our mechanistic ways of thinking. I think that humans tend to behave too much like machines. We repeat behaviors. Something that worked, we do it again and again. We need something to kind of that catalyst to make us think in a new way. What I'm seeing is that AI is a very powerful tool for a creative to make suggestions of new things to think about. What I found when I've done research on things like consciousness is that you can actually shift somebody's consciousness provided you kind of attack 2 of their senses. So if you just produce a visual world, I don't think you'll make somebody feel like they're somebody else. But if you actually add to that perhaps sound, sense, touch, you can actually transport somebody to somewhere else. I mean, there are some very classic experiments where you can start to identify with a false hand, but it needs to be a combination of the visual and somebody stroking your hand and you see it on the false hand and you start to identify with that hand. So I actually do think in 30 years' time there might be the prospect of us putting on some sort of suit. It's stimulating a multiple sensory experience that would trick our consciousness into making us feel like we are in the Maldives. But again, we have something unique, which is our embodiment, and that is very important part of our experience of the world. I mean, that's what Kant said. We only know the world through our senses. Then we use some analytic skills to extend those to see something beyond our sensual world. But that's where we start, and here today, it's about the smells, the sounds of the birds in the background, the heat, the feeling, and the closeness of our embodiment is so important to our engagement. That's the really fascinating thing. So we managed to understand that we can create code such that the code is making those decisions. So as it encounters more data, and this is a really interesting kind of message going forward for education, because it changes its code whenever it gets something wrong. If it's got some sort of, if it's trying to identify what's in an image and it gets something wrong, it rewrites more code to help it to get that right the next time. So what's really fascinating is that there's a human which kicks off the process, but after that, it's the data which changes the code. It reparameterizes itself, changes and things. And that's why something very exciting, because we'll get new things out of it that weren't put in by the human. And that's why I think we're seeing true kind of AI creativity. But it also means there's a danger there, because we start to lose track of how the AI is making its decisions. And I think this is why we one of the big things we'll need going forward is real deep digital literacy in the next generation, because they are going to need to tell when code is making bad decisions, when it's actually pushing and pulling us around in the wrong direction, when somebody is actually taking control. You know, the dangers of what happened with Cambridge Analytica. That, you know, we are so malleable, as Daniel Kahneman wrote in his book Thinking Fast and Slow. It just reveals just how easily we can be misled, and how easily we latch onto the wrong idea just from a little seed that's dropped in there. And once somebody understands that, you know, that's why I think we need tools to be able to question what the AI is doing and make sure that it is empathetic towards humanity, isn't on our side, and isn't sort of pushing and pulling us around in the direction we don't want to go.
Give them the example of the coding of the game that we talked about yesterday.
Yeah, so for me, the first example of computer creativity happened in the context of a piece of software that was created to play the game of Go. This happened a few years ago. You might remember the news story when a Korean player played this algorithm, and previously, no code got anywhere near even an amateur level. It's such a complex game to play. But the reason there was a kind of phase change is that this piece of code was basically taught the rules of the game, but then took all examples of human games that had been played up to that point and analysed what the patterns were that made one side win over another, started to kind of weight those moves against other moves which seemed to be losing the player of the game. So gradually, so what a human had done was to create an environment where then the code can, each time it plays a game, it can change parameters, numbers in that code to weight, okay, in this situation, more likely you should do this from what I've learned from that last game. And this piece of code, it analyzed all human games, ran out of those, but then it started generating synthetic games. So it played itself, essentially. And then it could, you know, each version of itself that it changed, it would, you know, if it won, then that one would be reinforced against the other one, which should be downgraded. So I think the exciting thing is the ability of humans to write kind of a meta code for code to write itself. And that's so after you've done that, you can just release the code on data. And as you say, you need lots of data. That's one of the key things, which is why, you know, maybe the likes of Rembrandt and Mozart are protected, because they're, you know, the great works of art, there isn't enough data for it to learn on. But the sort of second grade sort of artwork, the kind of music for corporate videos or computer games, although actually that's getting quite sophisticated, computer games. I mean, the real good composition happening there. But actually, computer games are an interesting example, because what you want when you're playing a computer game is that the music will respond to what you individually do. And each of us play a game in a very different way. I might choose to go one way or stay longer. And for a human to be able to write that amount of music, which is reacting to each individual person, is impossible. But an AI can respond on the fly to the things that you're doing and create the music to be in tune, kind of literally with how you're playing. And that's only possible with I mean, it's a bit like the journalism for your fantasy football league. You can't expect, we don't have enough humans to be able to do that, but an AI is perfect to be able to make bespoke music for every single person's experience. I'll tell you one thing, you see, as a writer, I have to write one book, which works on hopefully millions of minds if I sell enough copies. And that's quite a challenge, because all of you have different levels of ability. You've all got, some people who will know what an algorithm is. Some will never have heard of an algorithm before. And I've got to write one book which works on every single person's mind. I think there's an exciting future where we will have AI working alongside an author, and that the AI will know the books that you've read, know what kind of level you're at, and know the mathematical ability that you're at, and we'll be able to write a bespoke book together which will be just right for where you are, and somebody else will get a different book experience with the AI and me as author according to what their background is. I think doctors will be enhanced by AI. I think that you see, well, AI is able to read the medical journals and take all the data in a way that no doctor can expect to see all the advances that are happening over the years. So, but it's the combination. We've already seen that, for example, radiology scans, and AI is picking up things because of the patterns in there which a radiologist is missing, but the radiologist is also seeing things that the AI is missing. And we already have seen that AI and human together is better at identifying cancer in scans than each one individually. And that's my message going forward. We should work together. And we have the point, you see, Turing came up with this idea of artificial intelligence. He wanted to try and make a computer that replicated human intelligence. He wanted to use it to try and understand what intelligence was. But actually, I translate AI not as artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence or alternative. The exciting thing is AI intelligence is very different from human, and that's great because we want something new. We know how to create our intelligence. We don't do it in the lab. We do it in the bedroom and our kids, and then we get a new little intelligence comes out. So the exciting thing for me is we have this prospect of an enrichment of our experience, and I think doctors will really benefit going forward from that combination. In this game of Go, for example, there was a moment when the algorithm made a move that everyone thought that was a huge mistake. And it went on to prove at the end of the game that this move was very powerful and won it the game. But now change that into a medical situation. It's not a game. A game's a nice, safe place. Now the AI is suggesting a medical move, which everyone's going, but that's really dangerous. Why are you suggesting taking that drug? We've never thought of. So the question is, how do we tell whether this is genuinely a mistake by the AI or an incredibly inspired move that's going to actually save the patient? We need to try and get AI to try and explain why it's making certain suggestions. And that's quite a challenge because a lot of it's very deep coding, and you're asking the AI to somehow project a very high dimensional space into a much smaller space that we can sort of understand. This is the power of language, of course. We have hugely complex things going on in our heads, and we have this kind of very low dimensional thing called language, which tries to express to you the
tries
emotional.
To rationalize it.
I'm trying to explain, that I'm in love, and I have a few words, but it's hugely complex chemical, electrical thing going on, and that's what I think the challenge is. AI is almost like there's so much going on subconsciously in a code that we have to find some ways to ask it, well, why are you suggesting making that move? Can you articulate why that's a good move, or why are you suggesting that particular medical intervention? What is, and sometimes it's very, intuition. The point about intuition is very hard to put into words and rationalize it, but it's a sort of feeling that we have. I've got an intuition that this might work, just bear with me. That's sort of, in a way, we're seeing the intuition of AI, and we're finding it very difficult to, but do I want to trust that? The more times it gets it right, of course, we will trust it. But I think there are two really interesting issues here. The first is who owns the data? Because, for example, DeepMind in London, who developed this Go program, they went on then, the same with IBM. They developed a computer to play Jeopardy and then shifted over from games to health. The same happened in London. And they got access to the whole of the NHS database. Now, but that's a huge, data is the new oil is the kind of common thing you hear. Yeah, data is very valuable, and we individually give our data away freely, yet it's being exploited by companies. So I think there's an issue about who has access to this medical data, who owns it, who's being paid for it. Where should we have a data commons? So should I contribute my data for some sort of kickback? The other interesting thing is, of course, going forward is bespoke medicine. We realize that not everyone is the same, and so we will have medicine which is particular to your body or particular to somebody else's. And that, I think, is where AI could be very powerful, to be able to take your particular data and understand, oh, no, you are going to need this. And that is going to be the big innovation, I think, in health.
Marcus du Sautoy, thank you so much for speaking with us.